Hello again, this is UML Operator. All right, welcome to part 7 of a multi-part series on business process modeling notation, BPMN. So we've covered a great deal over the last few sessions, from BPMN1 into BPMN2. We did some actual demonstration of implementing your BPMN on a BPMN architecture or engine such as Camunda. In this session, we're actually going to get into delivering a real business process model. We're going to start with requirements management, as you would in any project. We're going to get into a types library. This is essentially like your catalog. I wanted to say TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework. You get into your actor catalog, role catalog. We talked about these things throughout use case models. And as we've gotten into BPMN, as we're building out various participants and their roles, we're going to get into service function catalog. Again, we're going to be using BPMN types just at a high level to show those in action. Technology architecture. Technology architecture is also going to be using BPMN types. We may dip into some standard UML or even Archimate libraries for technology architecture, and then our data architecture. So again, using BPMN types and modeling elements, we're just going to touch on those to help us develop our requirements and our scope for moving forward in this sample project. All right, so here we have a simple BPMN2 sample project, and in it, we are going to receive a scope document from the client stakeholders for the project team, a handful of starting requirements. Then we're going to look at our types library, which is going to include our application architecture, actor and role catalogs, service and function catalogs, talk about on a high level technology architecture, as well as data architecture within our enterprise continuums that we're going to be using to deliver this. Then what we're going to do is just generate an order processing choreography diagram. And we've touched on this model over the last couple of episodes, and we're going to reuse this model to help drive the project delivery, further requirements engineering as we're moving forward. All right, so let's get started with this fictitious project. The company is Arco. That's our demonstration company we've been using throughout many sessions here. So we receive an Arco scope document. Let's go ahead and drill down into this navigation cell. So we receive a scope document by Martin Marketer. That's our fictitious client. And it was submitted at the beginning of the year as we started this work effort. So they provide us some good nouns and verbs to start out with that we're able to start developing or eliciting some simple requirements. So in this particular case, we have 6 requirements. We're using auto numbering here. So we've got rec or requirement 1 through 6, and some simple nouns and verbs in each one of them to help us get started. So we pull out notes, just drag it right out here in front of us here. So very simple nouns and verbs that we actually pulled from the statement of work or the actual scope document that they had provided in the beginning. So very useful artifact. We don't always get a plethora of requirements when we're starting, and this is a good starting point for us. As you've learned from many sessions over the past year within this channel, any element you can actually drill down and build on further requirements during your development or requirements management or requirements engineering exercises. All right, so each requirement gives you an opportunity to say, hey, I'd like to learn a bit more, or I'd like to start developing from the requirements that you've initially given us in the beginning of a project, and we can continue to actually work off of these Sparx Enterprise Architect requirement elements to further develop the requirements for our effort. Before we go further, I want to talk about in the project browser, for me, it's over in the right, something called Inspector. And I've told you before that I would soon get into talking about this very powerful tab. During this session, I used it to for trace as an equivalent to traceability to as you're drilling through particular elements, you're able to see the traceability. But if we go back to details, you can actually configure, so these are inspector options, you can actually configure what you want to inspect. So you can see here, I have receptions turned off, maintenance turned off, and integration turned off. So these are just the things that I want to look at, and I can control those just by right-clicking in the inspector area, and then anywhere it'll pop up, inspector options, and I get this pop-up window. Okay, so I want to talk more about that because as we're selecting items, there's nothing really to inspect in the metadata except for requirements. So as you're moving through elements, you're able to see, are there any requirements that are underneath the element that I'm looking at? And this is going to become very powerful as we're moving through this project, especially as we're moving through our models. And then at any point, you can double click on these and you can further describe your requirements and change or update metadata and do other things to manage these internal requirements as you're moving forward. So that's the inspector. You're going to see me using it quite a bit. I'm not going to talk about it much more. You're just going to see me go to it, dance between details and trace. I'm not going to get into summary or status. I'm not going to get into these two tabs right now. We'll do that in a later session. But details and trace we're going to use quite a bit as we're going through this modeling exercise. So as we're moving through the requirements, the scope elements that we have, we can start also defining our types library, start building our actor catalog, any roles that are going to be part of the project, certainly not all inclusive. I mean, these requirements are not all inclusive, right? I think we can understand by now that any business, even a lemonade stand, can have dozens, if not hundreds of various requirements, whether they're business requirements, technical requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements. So we can go talk about that for days, but we're just trying to keep this very simple. So as we're going through our elicitation, our engineering exercise with our client stakeholders and other stakeholders, we're trying to build an understanding of the current mode of operations as we're moving to the future mode of operations, whatever the target is, and what the gaps are between those. A lot of our architecture, a lot of our requirements, they may be existing, already implemented. So you're trying to find out, okay, what's changing? What are we doing? So let's start with the actor catalog, right? So when we open this up, we may have some actors that we've developed from the nouns. I want to say that, the nouns. We'll get into the functions. Those are the verbs that I've talked about. So we'll get into an actor. Here we've got a customer. These are types, by the way, UML types, right? So these are participants. All the way down here, we grab a participant. That's what these elements are. And we are going to focus on customer, manufacturer, supplier, buyer, or bidder. The client in this case refers to a buyer as a bidder, someone that is out in the market procuring the best prices for products and supplies and parts, things that they might need. Then we have resource as a type, and so we have customer resource and agent resource. Virtual assistant, this is your AI bots, your machine learning driven assistance, if you will, augmenting the agent or the customer experience. We have our buyer resource or bidder, and then we have our vendor, or could also be a supplier, but the buyer is going out to various vendors and trying to bid for the best prices in the market. So these are our actors that we're going to be using in this particular exercise. So what's the difference between an actor catalog or participant catalog and a role catalog? Well, as we look down in the role definitions, you can see that we have the notion of resource roles. You see the stereotype here, resource roles. We also have partner roles. So I try to explain this in other videos, and I'll put a tag off to the side on the difference between participants, resources, and even roles as we're moving through this video. All right, so there's a lot to talk about in these types. Let's try to keep them as simple as possible as we're moving forward, okay? So the next thing in the type library is from our verbs, we're going to start generating a service and function catalog. Now, right now it's blank. We're going to do that very quickly at a high level as we're moving through our delivery exercise. Same thing goes with our technology architecture. Starting with a type such as interface, we'll identify the necessary APIs, microservices, various interfaces that are going to be driving our architecture and our delivery as we're moving forward. And then finally, we're going to touch on probably the most important thing to me, and that's our data. Whether it's our customer information management data, product information management data, how that data is coming in, how that data is going out. We'll take advantage of these elements as we're developing our delivery, our requirements, and our project as we're going forward. And finally, we will get to the star of our show, and that's the actual business process model that we're going to use to deliver the scope in this particular project as we're going forward. All right. So this is our target as we're going forward. After we start going through our requirements, we're going to reach a point where we can't go any further, and we're going to use actual choreography diagram to support our requirements development and further understanding of this particular business process for delivery in this stage of our project. All right, so let's get rolling here. So we have a requirements management namespace, and this is where all requirements will eventually be collected and managed from this point. And we may get a chance to do that in this session. We are starting to build out our types library. We have some participants defined, some customers defined. We can do requirements even down to these element levels. We have roles defined to support our modeling and choreography. We haven't done any functions yet or services. We may get an opportunity in this session to outline those. We're starting to build out our technology architecture. Will certainly be much more than just interface types and even links to other models. We may get an opportunity in this session to cover that. And we have identified some data architecture types in BPMN and elements to help us work from our choreography model. So here's our choreography model. We've seen this before in other sessions. We're going to start on the left side, of course, with start. Let's get into pan and zoom so we can easily move around. And we're going to start left to right. I'm not saying top to bottom, but let's go in an order that makes sense. If you recall from the previous session, there's a particular workspace layout that's most productive for me in this case, and I call it Properties, Notes, and Inspector. So right now that is configuring where we have properties set to the right of the work area where we do our modeling and diagrams. We have Inspector focused on, this includes our browser, the ability to pan and zoom, move around, but I want focus on Inspector so that when we select individual elements, we're zooming into properties that we can manage, as well as elements or metadata relevant to those elements within each one of the models. And we can very quickly move to traceability, trace, if you will, and back and forth. And then finally, in the lower right, we have notes, right? So we're going to be focused on notes. I also have traceability down here, which I don't use because I'm using Inspector. I have features in case we want to further define attributes and operations. And I have other elements that we may get to in this session. I'm not sure how much we're going to do as far as system output or simulation, but we'll certainly give it a shot depending on time. I'm trying to keep this under 30 minutes. Let's see if we can do it. Let's go. All right, so we're at the start event for this BPMN model that we're doing. This is a choreography diagram in BPMN 2.0. All right, these are the elements that we have. I've already drawn this out for time's sake, and you've seen this in previous exercises or episodes. So in the start event, when we're looking at Inspector, we've added 3 requirements, and I can click into each one of them and get a better idea. Let's go ahead and look at the properties. All we're doing in Inspector is looking at the requirements that we've added. They're internal. We haven't moved them to external yet for requirements management. We're going to manage them at the element level, right? So very much so, we're able to see properties, we're able to see notes, we're able to see the high-level requirement name, and then we can see the internal requirements, and then we'll know if they've been moved external once the team reaches some sort of conclusion, whether they're ready for requirements management or to move forward. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK, and let's get going. So in here, I have 3 requirements that we've added, right? Properties over here, difficulty we haven't assessed yet, right? Priority we haven't assessed yet. Your client may say, hey, everything is high, or MVP if you've created a custom category, or priority. Stability, we haven't assessed that yet, high, medium, low, or undetermined. Now, note that when we're doing requirements, whether it's internally or externally, stability is very important, because if we already have the capabilities in production, then the stability should be high, right? And that means that the effort in delivering is lower. If the stability is low, in other words, it was just released, we haven't passed warranty period, there's still some concerns about stability, etc., then there may be further costs that we will use when we're doing any cost assessment. And then undetermined is probably the worst. It's that, hey, we don't know yet, this is brand new, we haven't determined anything, how we're going to start, how we're going to solution, how we're going to design, or more. So I'm just going to leave it at moderate as we're going forward on each one of these, all right? Now, customer orders, you can see, you can write as much as you want as you're going through to describe this requirement, all right? And you can also change the name, the high-level name of each requirement. I usually try to keep them as short as possible so that they don't create this eye chart or they don't run off the properties page. That way we can very quickly move through. I also want to leave some room here when we start adding unique numbering or identifiers for each requirement as we progress. Now, the type here is business requirement, yet by default, Sparx does not offer a requirement type called business. This is custom. Now, I'm not going to get into that, but I want to make sure that I'm going to change this to functional, right? Then once I do that, it should change it to a functional requirement, right? And then there is no longer the ability to bring in business. So you may be asking, well, how did you come up with that type? Well, requirements may be delivered or being developed in a separate Sparx project in cloud, SQL, or local, where those types are defined and not available as reference data in this project. So that's very simple to add. If you want to, you can do that through, and I would do that through reusable asset service. Just bring in the reference data and you're all ready to go, right? But we're not going to do that in this session, just so you understand. So I'm able to move through these requirements, manage the properties of the requirements as we're progressing, right? So in this case, I'm going to go to trace. We see that start leads to or transitions to an order request choreography element where the participants are customer and manufacturer. You only have two participants, and I cover that in the previous session or session. So participant A, which is customer, is the initiating participant. That's why they're the same color as the element, where participant B, the manufacturer, has a lesser role as a participant in order requests. In other words, this is the customer focused on order requests where the support is from the manufacturer. I think you're starting to see how productive this organization of workspace to modeling can be. But let me show you another tip. I'm going to go back to my common layout, and I am going to double click within the diagram, go to diagram properties, use alias if available. And I'm going to turn that on. You can see that the elements now are a little less ambiguous to technical and non-technical stakeholders. So when you look at the start event and we look at properties, you can see we've assigned an alias to the name start. And we've stated the alias is order start event. Adds some clarity, right? And you can do that on any element. You can see that this choreography element, its alias is order platform, where the name of the choreography element is order request, and so on. So you see that the gateways are simply called order gateway. And the throw and catch, we'll get to in a moment, they're just called message out and message in. So you can turn on alias if they're available. If they're not available or blank, they will take the default name of the element for your diagram as you're moving forward. So as we go through each element, and I'm going to go back to the workspace that works best for me, and you can configure your workspace. I have multiple monitors, but I'm demonstrating this on a single monitor. I'm able to put these windows in separate monitors and then manage the various views and delivery any way I want. So I'm just, for this demonstration, I've got a little tight. This is what we're going to use. So as you're going through, we're going to go back to inspector and we're going to go back to details. You're able to see that for this one, we've added a requirement. Oh, and we have a constraint. This constraint, and let's go ahead and double click on the element and look at it from a dialog perspective. The constraint is an invariant type. You can certainly get more detailed and create precondition, postcondition, process, or OCL. I'm just going to leave it as invariant. And it's just is customer is the constraint, the precondition for this. They have to be a customer in order to order project. And we could add other choreography events in here that basically say, well, if they're not a customer, you could create a composite, and we won't have time in this session, but we are going to use structured editor and create composite diagrams for each one of these for simulation reasons. You can deal with those flows and additional choreography diagrams in those cases. All right, but let's continue. So we know that with trace, that order request transitions from the start event and transitions to the can we fulfill the order? In other words, the order gateway. Can fulfill order, question mark. Yes, we go here. You can see in traceability the transitions to and from. And target reference values, if applicable, those are tag values that have been added into this. So if we go to properties and we go to, sorry about that, you have various tag values dealing with the category values. So we've assigned a type here. Oh, we have documentation. Let's look at this. So in this particular case, we have documentation, which is sample Beeple code, and you could type regular active human voice, or you could put sample code for documentation that could be parsed later on when it's being converted to BPEL by the Beeple developer that's using the BPN models. And I'll try to get a little more into that as we're going forward. So we have an assignment and we have a category value, all right? And then we can look at a product assignment and we've got a value reference. See, so an inspector, you're able to drill down into more information that may be available at the element level. So we'll see more of that when we get into types, hopefully in this session. So what we're going to do is we're going to use pan and zoom and start moving a little bit more to there we go, to the right. And if the answer is no, the product's not available, it's going to roll to procure parts, where the manufacturer is the initiating participant, and now supplier is our secondary participant supporting the procurement of parts. And then you can look at traceability and you can see how this sequence flows and through the order gateway, dealing with different message events. This one's dealing with parts available. So you can see here in tag values, we've assigned a type dealing with the availability of parts. So in here, we're able to go to our roles catalog and pull out types that we've defined, right? Now we'll continue to move to the right here, go a little faster, deliver order. You can see where that sequence is from using trace and inspector. Go down to details, look at requirements, any other metadata. And right now, there's just a requirement relevant to this. And then you can see that in traceability, that it flows to this end event. And you can do that for any element that you're looking at. So when we look at that, we've got a requirement, only one requirement that's dealing with order rejection or order, the parts, products, services are not available, right? And for post-part auction, we have relationships to the gateway, but we don't have any requirements, and which need further definitions may be required. So you're able to quickly move through your elements here to further develop your requirements going forward. All right, let's roll back over to our start element in this choreography diagram. We're in Inspector. We see we've got 3 requirements. We can either double click on Start to open up properties or just select the first requirement here. I'm going to go ahead and select it. Right, so property box pops up for this. Let's move this over a little bit here. And we want to externalize. Everyone agrees on this. It's clear enough to move forward for requirements management. We're going to right click in here. We're going to move external and we're going to go to the requirements management folder or namespace. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just put it in the requirements management namespace. There we go. It is being moved, and now this requirement is externalized. Let's go ahead and close this. Let's go to requirements management in the browser, and you can see that our requirement, you can find it very quickly because there's not an official requirement number, right? So we're going to open up requirements management. Let's drag and drop our new requirement that's been externalized as a link. You learned this in that those sessions around requirements. And now we have it here, right? The problem with this is that it's not numbered, and you may not want to number these at this particular point, and you need to have a strategy for managing your requirements. So what I'm going to do is create a namespace under requirements management dealing with start events. Start events. And you can give it any name you want. I may rename it later. I'm going to create a diagram. Don't have to, it's optional. And I'm going to use extended requirements as the diagram type, right? Now I have a blank diagram in a namespace called start events. And I'm going to move this diagram, drag and drop it into this space. And now I have it in this diagram, but the element is actually in the requirements management namespace. So what we're going to do from requirements management is we're going to delete it from this model, right? Then we're going to come back to the start event and we're going to move this requirement into this namespace. And you can see now namespace shows it's in the namespace or package that it belongs in. And I can do this I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to close this and might as well save it. And I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to go to inspector, right? Inspector right here. And now you can see in inspector, I only have 2 requirements that are internalized, right? So I can do it for each one of them. So I can grab the next one, which is customer orders, right click, move external requirements, and I want to put it under start event, and that would be the area. You will create different namespaces, either by element or by category of element, right? So I'm going to put it in start event, and now that one's been moved. I'm going to externalize this one to business requirements start event, and now that's been moved. Now those are externalized, so now when I'm looking at the element, I don't have any requirements metadata relevant to the element. But if I go to browser, I go to start event, I can bring in these other, I'm going to bring in these 2, drag and drop, just select them, both of them, drag and drop both of them as links, select for all, hit OK. There we go. Use layout, left justify, space them down equally. And there we go. We can start building requirements. All right, darn it. I went a few minutes over. Apologize for that. Trying to keep these at 30. So I just wanted to wrap up a couple things. Number one is that, all right, in Inspector, we lost the ability at the element level to see the requirements, right? But if I go to trace, you can see that this start event implements these requirements. And I can, looking at that from trace, that is part of inspector. So even from here, I can go to these, I can launch them, and now you see realization. So if I was to drag and drop this element into a particular model, you're able to see that the start event realizes this requirement. So that's a pretty neat feature within Sparx, and that gives you the ability to do that. So you have traceability again here within Inspector, and of course you have traceability down in here using the traceability windows we're going forward. All right. All right, in our next session, we're going to get into simulation. We're going to drill down into these elements. We're going to use structured editor to build other diagrams so that we can understand and validate that our models will work and that our design will work and that our requirements are as complete as possible. So this is a simulation workspace that I created, and I talk about this in other videos. We're simply going to right click in here, execute simulation, manual simulation, and you can see it's running through each one of them. We get to a gateway where a decision needs to be made. We're just going to go down the happy path. Yes, we can fulfill the order. We're going to select OK, and it's going to run through to an end event. So we're able to simulate at any point. We're going to build other models. We're going to simulate those. We may develop more requirements as we're running through validating our design approach, solution approach, our model approach. So I look forward to seeing you in that session. Thanks very much for sticking around this long. And until then, happy modeling.